Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the AI Spy and Happy New Year. And the first episode of this year, I wanted to focus on a very special topic because there's a lot of buzz around AI, has been for a couple of years. We hear so many big stories, there is hype, there is fear. Generally, a lot of it is happening and it's happening too fast. Every week we hear progress, things changing. AI is changing how organizations do their business, how we interact with different organizations. Recently, every phone call I've made to a customer contact center feels like I'm talking to an AI, even though it sounds like a person. Companies change how they are interacting with us. If you've seen some of the ads on LinkedIn, they're very more catered towards and designed and tailor made towards who's consuming them. So I'm sure there's some AI at work there, and it's also changing how people interact with each other. But underneath all of that, what's fundamentally changing is human behavior. It's changing for individuals, organizations, fraudsters, and criminal networks. So behavior overall is shifting, and that's the topic that I wanted to discuss. And I'm joined by James McDowell. James, welcome to AI Spy.
Hi, thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So, James, I always start with origin stories and maybe just a short introduction, and then we'll talk about how you got into this field.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as mentioned, James McDowell, I am the executive director of the Cybercrime Research Institute, which is a nonprofit that we're focused on researching cyberpsychology and specific forensic cyberpsychology, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. And then I'm also an adjunct professor with American Military University, where we're teaching the next generation of cybercrime investigators. So, really coming at it a few different ways. And then in my past lives as a practitioner, I got a lot of experience both in law enforcement, public, private sectors around cybercrime investigations. And so all of that culminated in pursuing a degree in psychology and a few other degrees in there as well, but really focused on, like, again, cyber psychology and how we interact differently online and then with different technologies like AI.
So, Jay, you describe yourself now and also on LinkedIn as a cyber psychologist. And there's also this term, forensic cyber psychology. So, can you explain to me what forensic, and to the listeners also, what forensic cyber psychology is, and what does it seek to answer? What is the kind of problems that it seeks to answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Common question because it's a new emerging area just in cyber psychology more broadly. There's a lot of different terms that get tossed around. Cyber psychology is kind of the one that resonates with most people and is really a burgeoning area outside of the US. And so you'll see it more kind of trickling into the United States as a term. Other terms that encompass like the idea of cyber psychology are internet psychology or human factors in cybersecurity when it's applied to cybersecurity. And so it's a huge field. Really, at the end of the day, it's how does the internet, how does technology change how we interact with each other, with ourselves? And then is that different between the physical and digital worlds? And then also within forensic cyberpsychology, how does that apply in the like criminal element, and how does our relationship to the truth change online with fake news and deep fakes, talking about AI, but then also really like how can that be exploited? How can our psychology be exploited to perpetrate cybercrime? And then how can we build more resilient cognitive forces within ourselves to help, not succumb to those perpetrators?
So, something I want to ask you, and I apologize, I hadn't sent this question out, but now something that you said, like how we represent truth online. Yes, there is the deep fakes, there is, as humans, right? Sometimes when we are online, like on Facebook or on social media, people put out a version of themselves, which is probably not the true representation of them. So is that also a behavior that like that I've seen? And is it? It's accurate to say that, right? It's not a
Yeah,
true.
absolutely. And like I was laughing too because my wife calls like Instagram like the highlight reel, right? Like, and I think the really interesting piece, like I'm glad all of that existed after I was a teenager because I can only imagine like how difficult it is as a teenager comparing yourself to what you're seeing online from other people. That again, it's a selected personality, a selected experiences that they're willing to share with the world. And I think there's been an overcorrection in recent years with like the app Be Real that got really popular for a few years, where people were trying to show not just the highlight reels, but I think that was very boring, and that's why that's not a big app anymore because people want to see the highlight reels for some folks. And so I think that yeah, it goes back to just really like what is that, and then are you able to articulate that you're presenting a different side of yourself online versus the physical world, and is that a conscious decision or is that subconscious? And then really how does that influence how you interact with others on different platforms? Does it vary across platforms? And those sorts of questions are really where cyber psychology comes in. And then when we talk about that with criminals and like romance scams and different cybercrime, like personal cybercrimes that are out there, that's really where the cognitive piece comes in that is really interesting to me.
So we'll talk about the criminal behavior in a bit. Now, in just in general, how is AI changing human behavior, the way we think or the way we behave? What kind of behavioral shifts are you seeing as AI becomes more embedded in daily life?
Yeah, great point that you're raising here, right? There's a lot of research that's coming out, and so I want to be careful. Like, the science is never settled, but I think with AI specifically, right, we're always evolving, and a million studies come out every day in this space. But what's really interesting is, we're seeing it not only in how like people are more reliant on like deferring cognition to
Mm.
technology, right? Like the automation bias. Like people, if you're automating too much, people become too reliant on the automation and don't check it. And that's where the idea of human in the loop is really popular in the AI space. But beyond that, we're seeing people that are more direct. I guess the diplomatic way is like business forward people, where you might get emails that are like just very to the point and versus kind of the fluff that used to come through emails. And that is hypothesized to be somewhat related to AI because you are more direct with AI to get a better result a lot of the time. You don't put the fluff in. And so then you're seeing some of that manifest in other relationships outside of relationships with a chatbot.
So, in relationship with chatbots, so you mentioned chatbot, and in one of your posts, LinkedIn posts, you wrote about the Eliza effect. So, my listeners are a lot younger than you and I are, so they might not be familiar with what the Eliza. So, can you talk about a little bit about what the Eliza effect is, and why does it matter in the modern age of AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Eliza effect came about in the 1960s. So it was really the first chatbot was named Eliza. And I'm very passionate about the Eliza effect because my wife's name's Eliza. And she's not a chatbot, just for everyone and for your listeners. And I didn't come up with this. But the idea of the chatbot was Eliza was the first chatbot, and people very quickly, the scientific term is but like put human traits onto technology in simple terms. And like really the chatbot mimicked what people were telling it and just paraphrased the responses. And it wasn't even to the point that we have with ChatGPT and the different tools that are out there now, where it's actually really changing the content. It was literally the Eliza chatbot was just paraphrasing people's inputs, and they thought that it was a human, and like that they then used human traits to describe it. They put a lot of value into the humanity of this chatbot that was really just a simple series of rules. And so that became known as the Eliza effect. It's been popular and comes in and out of vogue as there's a new advancement in AI. And really, with all the tools in the late or early 2020, like 2022, there was a lot of re-emergence of that idea because you'll see and when you talk with people about different tools that come out, a lot of people will say he, she, and like
Yeah.
really start to not say it. And you're like, oh, that's really interesting. And that's the Eliza effect in action, where you're seeing someone think this describe something as human that is not human.
Very interesting. Yeah, we do have a tendency to humanize technology. So you're doing all this excellent research, and then I want to talk about something very exciting that you recently achieved is your book. I think it's been in the works for a while. It's called. I'll let you talk about it. I think it's called Forensic Cyberpsychology and the Human Side of Cybercrime. I haven't read it yet. I do intend to, but I've read the abstract. In the abstract, you state, and I'm going to quote you, the research aims to illuminating the motivations, behaviors, and thought processes of perpetrators and their targets using psychological analysis and real world case studies. So we'll go into what that means, and without giving away the whole book, maybe talk about that. But firstly, what led to writing of this book?
Yeah, great question. So I've always wanted to write a book. I think a lot of people are very passionate about like wanting to write a book. And so that was like part of the motivation. The other piece, I mentioned earlier, like a lot of my career was in law enforcement and really white collar crime investigations, albeit cybercrime or just general financial fraud. And so with that, really got to see a lot around the victim's story or the survivor's stories and how not only they experienced cybercrime, but then how did they overcome it? And so really, I felt like there was a gap in what was out there, what was offered, not only to law enforcement, but just the general public around how we talk about cybercrime, how we talk about victimization, how we talk about survivors. And really, that's where this book came in and with a background in psychology, really seeing a huge opportunity for us not only to shape the narrative in how we talk about survivors of cybercrime, and then really talking about how we can be better as a society in preventing future victimization or re-victimization of individuals if they were victimized once. Some of the psychology that plays into being re-victimized can actually create this self-perpetuating cycle of cybercrime victimization, and how can we break that cycle? And so that's where the book came in, and the idea came in from the I guess the hot button term is pracademic, right? So you have the practitioner and the academic, and that's where the book comes in and trying to bridge the gap between those two things.
That's awesome. I'm going to use that term, academic. I love it. I like to think of myself starting today as a academic. So any stories, interesting stories, nuggets that you want to share from the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot in there that I'm not going to do justice to off the the top of my head, but I think the really interesting chapter that I was really passionate in writing outside of all the chapters, but chapter around emerging technology and like the duality of technology, because I think it's talked about in like headlines, but it's really not something that I've seen a huge deep dive into. And by the duality of technology, I mean like any advancement in technology can be both good and bad, and it's really in the hands of the people using it. And how can we as a society appreciate that and then think through the implications of technological advancements as they're happening rather than this reaction? And I think AI is a really good example of that, because as we saw and as we all experience, if we use these AI tools in our personal or professional lives, the efficiencies that you can gain are incredible, and the capabilities continue to grow, and like the ways in which we can function in the world now are completely different than they were 2 to 4 years ago. And every advancement, it feels like every week there's a new advancement in these tools, and that creates these light year jumps for us, right? But like there's also the downside, and like if we as good people are getting it, the bad people are getting it too, and how are they exploiting it and using it against us, and how can we appreciate that? And I think that's what I really enjoyed writing. In terms of stories, I think just I know we'll get into it a little bit later, but like as we talk about business email compromise and thinking about the psychology of cybercrime itself, I think that's a really interesting piece that is not talked about enough, in my opinion, in terms of cybersecurity awareness current state. I think it's getting more traction, but really thinking through the human piece of that and how our psychology is used against us to be exploited. And it's not a smart, dumb thing, which is my biggest pet peeve, especially coming from law enforcement. Like, how could someone fall for that scam? And how could you click on that link? It's how were they able to create a link that was so convincing that you felt you needed to click on it? And I think with AI and that hyper personalization that comes from AI, we're only going to see more and more realistic, more and more convincing links and social engineering attacks that are hyper personalized to specific individuals. And then how can we help people appreciate that that's coming?
Yeah, so I've always maintained that anybody can fall for a scam. It's just different people fall for different scams. So you and I, you might fall for a different scam versus me versus somebody else. So it's not like everybody is susceptible to scams. So that question of, oh, how could you be? It's like you said, it's not a smart or stupid question. It's just circumstance and urgency and what state of mind you are in at that point in time. Regarding the duality point that you mentioned, the first time actually I heard you speak was at the ACFE conference, and you framed this duality problem in a way in such simple terms that I haven't heard anybody explain. So that's when I reached out to you, because I was you've said offensive AI and defensive AI. That AI is being weaponized, used by bad actors. That is the offensive AI. But there's also the defensive AI, and that's the we keep hearing about the AI arms race, the good versus the bad, and this is the duality of technology. And it's not just AI, right? Any kind of technology that has been developed, there's always been that duality. That one of the good use is like recently everybody saw the movie Oppenheimer. That's a technology that was developed. There's some great things that you can do with it, but it was used also to create a bomb. So the duality of technology has always existed, and I think it was brilliant framing from you in that. So I just loved it when I was listening to you speak. Now, from your research, are there lessons that could change how organizations think of prevention and responsibility when it comes to preventing frauds or scams?
Yeah, for organizations, I'll give the disclaimer. I think it's up to organizations on the level of risk that they're willing to accept or leave on the table. But really, I think an important component of cybersecurity programs as we look at future-proofing them is really thinking through the incentives. And what I mean by that is really, I understand the idea of like if you click on the social engineering link, like you're in trouble. But like, is terminating employees for clicking on links sending a wrong message where you're going to get people that, you're incentivizing the wrong behaviors long term? And so I think that's an organizational decision that organization leaders have to make for their own organizations. But I think that's a really important component of thinking through risk is what behaviors are you incentivizing and what actions are you taking as an organization, and are you incentivizing the right behaviors with those actions? And so I think that's the really important piece. As we talk about survivors of cybercrime, I think we also need to talk about ways in which we can build that resilience, because it's not an if, it's a when. And that's both from the individual and the organizational level. Are we thinking about our processes in a way that we can respond to incidents at the organization level? If there's a ransomware attack, is the ransomware playbook on the computer that we now can't access, and that's the only copy we have? That has happened in cases before, and then there's the issues that come with that. Or if the email doesn't work and you're a geographically distributed team, how are you planning to communicate? Is that going to be a secure communication? Does it need to be secure communication if it's sensitive information? And those types of questions, thinking through those on the front end so that when you are dealing with an incident at the organization level, you're not making those decisions in that heightened state, as we talk about psychology, where you're not taking in all the information that you need to.
I was going to ask you something about you mentioned it briefly now, but also previously the re-victimization parts. I think AARP did a study. It's very likely that people who have been victims of a scam or a fraud are more likely to fall for a scam than someone who's never fallen prey to a scam. Is that also what you see in some of the research that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think not recalling the ARP study off the top of my head, I think like correlation and causation are important to always keep in mind in the context of studies. I'm sure they did that with their study, but really, as we talk about re-victimization, is it re-victimization because people are like the fraudsters have those people's contact information and they're seeing more instances of scams and like targeted communications coming to that person, and so that's why they're falling victim more frequently? Or is it truly, as I've seen in my research, where individuals that are victimized, especially as we talk about older adults who are concerned about their autonomy and kind of losing their autonomy, albeit, or whether it's because their family members step in as trustees and take over their financial responsibilities, or the big fear of having to go to a nursing home or things like that, they underreport. But then part of the victim cycle and survivor cycle is social withdrawal. And so as you withdraw socially from your network in the physical world, whether it's your family, your friends, because you're either ashamed or trying to process the victimization, you then become more reliant on digital relationships, typically, in what we see. And so then you are getting that more frequent communication because you're in the like this is a victim database, and then you're getting more targeted communications. You've withdrawn from your social network in the physical world, and then you're trying to fill that social need in the digital world with these people that are now fraudsters and victimizing you, and you create the cycle of the actual manifestations from that victimization are what make you more susceptible to the fraud the next time. And then these fraudsters are very sophisticated, and like we see a lot in the pig butchering, which I know is kind of a debated term these days, but I think it's important to use the visceral term for this type of fraud because it's so aggressive. But a lot of those scams, you'll see revictimization from the same fraudsters just presenting as different people. And what I mean by that is the first scam may take $100,000 from a victim as a crypto investment scam, but then the individual fraudster may come back and say, I'm a customs attorney. I want to help you get your money. Give me $50,000. I'll help you get your money. And then if they pay that, you may get a tax professional that comes out of the woodwork and says, give me $10,000 for your taxes. And so like that reloading scam combined on top of it with that victim. And that's where the term pig butchering is, like bleeding a victim dry. That's, they do that with these reloading and revictimization.
Right. So I want to move to something more optimistic.
Yeah.
So you serve as the executive director at CRI. So what led to the start of CRI? What's the kind of work that you want to achieve at CRI?
Yeah, absolutely. More positive work,
Yes.
really. Not just doom and gloom and not talking about pig butchering all the time, but really helping people understand the full world out there, and that it's not, we shouldn't blame victims because it's not something that is a lot of times a cognitive choice. It's something that is like, a state that is induced in the victim by the perpetrator. And so that's really where I see us going with the CRI, and where we can really fill a gap is thinking through building resilience and looking at cybercrime differently, and looking at the human element in cybercrime. And that's where forensic cyberpsychology comes in, is really thinking about the psychology of it, because there's plenty of studies, plenty of work, plenty of companies out there that are looking at the technical side of cybercrime. And, there's always going to be new areas of technology that come out, and new vulnerabilities and new attack vectors and new 0 days and yada, 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 any tech term we could throw out there. But our human psychology, for the most part, is the same as it was, as it's developed for human evolution. It's always been there. And I think that's where we can fill a need in thinking through the psychology of that.
So, James, we're coming towards the end. We are almost at time. So, anything that you want to share with your audience that I might not have asked during this discussion?
Yeah, I think please reach out, cybercrime.institute, if you enjoyed this and want to connect, or find me on LinkedIn. As mentioned, I'm on there. Would love to connect with anybody that is interested in looking at this area, or is already looking in this area of cyberpsychology or forensic cyberpsychology. And then, yeah, I guess I'll give a shameless plug on Amazon or Routledge, my publisher's website. You could pick up Forensic Cyberpsychology, the human side of cybercrime, the mind behind the screen, which is what I call it, because that is a huge mouthful of a title. So the mind behind the screen is available now online.
So I'm going to add links to your LinkedIn profile, the link to Amazon, and also CRI. I'm also going to add a link to a cool tool that you built that generates prompts. So I found it very interesting to use. So I'm going to add all of these links so everyone can. Please follow James. I follow his content on LinkedIn. And I'm really looking forward to reading the book that it's on Amazon. Thank you. Thank you so much for making time today and talking to us. And for everyone, that's a wrap on this one. We'll see you again with another A-lister on our next episode. Until then, bye.